Hey there, I'm Will Marshall at Pyramind in San Francisco. Today I'm going to be talking about the differences between performing live using CDJs and performing using Ableton Live. Now, these two approaches to performance are very different from each other, so it's not meaningful to say that one is necessarily better or worse, but each has a clear set of strengths and weaknesses. CDJs are very convenient and very good for improvisational, more traditional DJ sets, whereas Ableton is inflexible but lets you dial in whatever you want very precisely if you're willing to put the preparation time in. So to look at CDJs initially, the biggest and most obvious advantage is that they're installed in basically every venue you might realistically play in. They're standardized, pretty much everyone has CDJs that look more or less like these. They're usually already connected, already on stage, they work the same way, and you don't have to carry them with you. You can carry a CD wallet or USB sticks or both, ideally, none of which is particularly complicated or heavy. You can throw that in a little backpack. So the convenience factor is huge. Preparing sets for CDJs is also pretty straightforward, especially now Rekordbox has gotten really good. Basically, you can construct something kind of akin to an iTunes library, a curated list of all of the tracks that you realistically want to play. You can break it up by genre, tempo, feeling, however you want to organize. And you can work with a very large and kind of well-organized pool of different material. You can then just kind of put it straight in the CDJ and perform with it with kind of minimal fuss. So this allows you, if you're doing kind of traditional club DJing, to have a really big pool of tracks that you're drawing from. It allows you to deviate what you're doing, go with a crowd movement, throw stuff in from random genres. It basically gives you a lot of flexibility in a kind of traditional DJing context. Downsides of CDJs, they're only specific, well, they're specific to what it is you need to do. CDJs have very limited effects. Well, obviously there are almost no effects on the CDJs other than some kind of scratching techniques and backspin techniques. The effects, if they're there, will be found on the mixer. But they're not the greatest effects as a rule. There are some newer models of mixers that have nice effects, but they're not commonly found in clubs, or at least not in my experience. So you don't necessarily need effects or particularly in-depth effects if you're doing a DJ set, but it is sometimes a limitation to not have those available. The CDJs, you also have limited control over the tracks that you're playing. You can loop stuff, you can set cue points and a few things like that, but essentially you're stuck with just working with mastered, complete chunks of audio. You could, in theory, perform with stems and CDJs, but you would need to have 6 CDJs on stage or something, which is just impractical. No one's going to do that. CDJs don't give you any capacity to perform with live instruments. I mean, you can have a separate rig, say you could have a guitar with an amp and all mic'd up, entirely separate from the CDJs, but the CDJs don't offer anything. You'd have to bring that in yourself separately, and it can be hard to kind of incorporate live instruments into a standard CDJ and mixer setup in a way that sounds good. So yeah, if you're doing kind of, I guess more than anything, either more traditional DJing or you're performing in a lot of places very rapidly and you don't want to be hauling a lot of gear around. Or if you're performing in small venues where bringing in your own rig isn't practical, or venues where there's no expectation from the audience that you will be doing anything more in-depth than DJing, CDJs are kind of by far the most practical choice. I mostly perform with Ableton, but I have a CDJ set up at home I practice with, and I kind of keep a set of DJ material, a bunch of CDs and some USB sticks available so I can do off-the-cuff or casual sets whenever I want. So, by contrast, Ableton is designed for and is really good for kind of constructing a show as opposed to playing a set. That's kind of how I think about it. And when I say a show, I mean more on the lines of what you would see if you went to a rock concert or something like that. Typically, a band in that environment is working from a set list. They might deviate, they have some flexibility in that, but they have a much smaller pool of material they're working with, but they're doing much more with that material. They're performing parts of it live or the whole thing live if it's a band. and they're kind of going really in depth with exactly how the specific tracks they've got are being delivered. So this is where Ableton really shines. It doesn't have a track browser, it doesn't have a playlist system. There's no practical or realistic way to have a very large number of tracks prepared in Ableton and to DJ with them. I've seen people try and do this. It always feels like an uphill struggle versus just using CDJs. It's a kind of marginal benefit and a lot of work to try and get it working. But if you are, especially if you're a producer and you're kind of performing all or predominantly your own material, Ableton will let you dial that material in very, very precisely. So to give you some examples of what this means in practice, something I've seen done and I'm playing with myself at the moment in Ableton is I work with a band live, and so there are parts of my performances that are sequenced and are coming out of the computer, and there are parts of my performances that are coming from my band members. And the way I've structured the songs in Ableton has a lot of stuff or kind of features that are intended to accommodate my band. So for example, one of my tracks features a saxophone solo, and that saxophone solo is of indeterminate length. We play until the saxophone player gives me a cue and tells me that he wants to finish at the end of the next phrase. And so what I've done in Ableton is essentially split out a section of the track that is kind of a broken down component. I pulled all the lead elements out. I've just left a basic harmony and constructed a 16-bar loop. And that loop is sitting there. I can go into it at any time during the track and kind of communicate with my band about when they want me to do that. I can then leave it there for as long as I want. I can even introduce other elements from other parts of the song over it if I feel that's appropriate. And then when we're done, when kind of all the soloing, the improvisation's done, we can drop back out of it and go into the original track. So that kind of sequencing or programming is something you can really dial in super precisely in Ableton. Some other stuff Ableton offers, again kind of more on the live performance tip, is you can run synths through it, so you can do all sorts of live synth work, and there's a lot of precision stuff you can do around basically automatically swapping your synth patches as you move through the set. If you're using something like Guitar Rig to process a guitar, you can have Ableton automatically swap out the Guitar Rig presets. You change the amp and the cabinet and all that stuff as you go through the song. It just takes some of the headache out of kind of keeping track of lots of different sounds and textures. Ableton will also let you set up drums and sample banks and stuff like that very easily, and even as you move through the set, kind of swap out what your drum pad controllers or whatever you're using are playing. So you can have a lot of samples, synths, all of that live stuff, and have it really synchronized with your performance, provided you're working with a constrained pool of things. It's not practical to do that for thousands of songs. You can also do a lot of interesting stuff with other musicians. So kind of at a basic level with Ableton, for example, you can send a metronome tick out to your drummer if you're working with a drummer, something like that, so that everyone in your band can be fed specific types or bits of audio to keep them in sync, to give them cues for different things. Basically up to your imagination. The way my current live setup works, there's a separate set of sounds that play at specific times that go to each of the people in the band, so I can cue people up with beeping noises or with little count-ins for specific parts I want them to play to kind of choreograph the whole thing. It took a lot of time to set it up, but it makes the overall performance a lot tighter. The other huge thing about Ableton is the effects. Ableton has essentially studio quality effects that are designed to be used in live context. So especially if you're doing stems-based performance, kind of on a Richie Hawtin style, where you've got your tracks broken down to components and loops and you're layering it up and breaking it all down again live, the Ableton effects sound really good. You can put professional studio reverbs in there, really nice delays and things like that. It's definitely a level up from anything you would find on a standard DJ mixer. And so that's a huge advantage. You can really custom build your own effects for your performance and dial them in to sound exactly the way you want. Again, hard to do if you're working with a big pool of wildly disparate material, but if you have a specific type of performance and a specific sound, it allows you to really hone in and construct exactly what you want. So let's look at the downsides of Ableton, which are definitely substantial. The first is that you need to do a lot of preparation for a performance. So if you're like a producer or a band or something like that and you're touring and you're playing in different places, then Ableton works because you can do all the preparation once. It might take you a few weeks to get it all dialed in, but then you can just tour with it. If you were doing like a residency in a club or something like that, the preparation time is going to be a pain because you'll want to change your set week to week, and Ableton just makes that unnecessarily complicated. So that's definitely a big limitation. It can be hard to improvise with Ableton, although you can always bring CDs and beat match in with the CDJs if you kind of want to deviate from a set for some reason. It's just unnecessarily complicated, I think. The other thing is, improvisation in Ableton it's fine in terms of instruments and stuff like that, but it's basically impossible to change the way that your set works mid-performance. So you're stuck with the decisions you've made before you started to perform, and if you want to change those decisions, you have to wait until the next performance and then change the setup. Whereas with CDJs and stuff like that, there's a lot of on-the-fly looping and stuff like that that lets you make much more off-the-cuff decisions about how exactly your set is going to play out. So that is kind of what I see as the difference. In terms of who should be using CDJs, who should be using Ableton, as I said, if you're playing out a lot, you're playing in clearly DJ or club music oriented environments, you're playing a lot of other people's material, I would lean CDJs for sure. If you're producing all your own material, but it's kind of all pure electronic music and there's not much hands-on stuff you can do, I would also lean CDJs. But as soon as you start performing parts of your tracks live, performing with other musicians, maybe you want to incorporate like synchronization with a light show or something like that, maybe down the line. As soon as you start building out a performance that's more in-depth and more of a showpiece than a DJ set, that's when I would start looking at Ableton and seriously thinking about making the switch. Alright, I hope that was useful to you. I'm Will Marshall and you are watching Pyramind on YouTube. Thank you.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.